If you haven't noticed, I rarely talk about suburbs. I mean, the channel is called CityNerd, so it's not really shocking, but a suburb is a city. So we're gonna break out of the mold today and explore uncharted territory. It's the 10 most urban suburbs in North America, which I pledge to convince you is not an oxymoron, and it's coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on, scratch that. This week it's Suburb Nerd, and viewer-suggested topics are the name of the game today. In fact, I've had a ton of requests for this, or like variations on it. Walkable suburbs, non-car dependent suburbs, suburbs that are good for transit, and I like this, hidden cities. Places that, if they were located on their own away from giant metro areas, would be recognized as significant cities in their own right. You guys can see that these comments are months old. I really do stow away the good ones and just kind of let them ripen. Anyway, all of these suggestions are kind of folded into what I'm doing today. And I bookmarked this tweet from Martha Lauren, who is a good follow if you're on Twitter, and also has the coolest handle. She said, "Suburbs are like strodes, trying to be two different things at the same time and failing at both." I actually still think about this tweet a lot. What I want to talk about today, though, is suburbs that are more recognizably urban than not only the typical large US city, but often the very city whose metro area the suburb in question actually occupies. So, full disclosure, I'm actually living in a suburb for the first time in my life, and I chose a very car-centric suburb on purpose because I'm a masochist who wanted to make a point. Probably ill-advised. Anyway, the lease is almost up, and my verdict is never again. But something like Henderson, Nevada is, unfortunately, what most people visualize when they think about suburbia. And they're not wrong. But today we're going to look at a very different kind of suburb. The 10 that are on today's list are what I think of as nice suburbs. And if you don't normally watch this channel, you might find I have a bit of a different definition of what a nice suburb is than what you'd expect. What I'm looking for is a walkable, bikeable place with great transit, dense land uses, and strong urban fabric. Let's quickly define what I mean by suburb because it's not quite as straightforward as you might think. A simple definition would be it's a city that's within the metropolitan statistical area of a larger core city. Well, that seems reasonable, but then by that definition, cities like St. Paul, Minnesota and Fort Worth, Texas would be considered suburbs, and I just don't buy that. Some MSAs have more than one core city, so it's a bit of a judgment call. So for this exercise, I'm gonna say that, for example, Oakland, Long Beach, and Newark, New Jersey are not suburbs. Feel free to disagree or make your case down in the comments. Before I get into scoring criteria, I had a couple pass-fail. One, I only looked at suburbs with a population over 50,000. A bit arbitrary, but part of the idea here is that it's a city that if you took it out of its metro area and dropped it in the middle of nowhere, it would be diminished somewhat, but it could still be a great city on its own merits. Also, I just don't have the patience to look at every tiny municipality that has like a cute main street. That's just not what this channel is about anyway. Also, and kind of contradictory to that first one, I need there to be metro or light rail that connects to the core city. I mean, connections to the core city have to be important. Otherwise, why bother living in a suburb in the first place? Just go live in a small town somewhere. It's gonna be a lot less expensive. And the scoring criteria, I'll use an honorable mention to illustrate, which is Oak Park, Illinois, which I had at number 11. The criteria I threw in the mixer this week were 1, population density, 2, does it have its own downtown or at least active walkable main streets, 3, walk score rating, 4, bike score rating, and 5, transit coverage and service. I think this ends up being a fun list and one that's fun to guess along with once you understand the criteria, so let's get into it. Number 10 is Arlington, Virginia. First of all, I need someone who understands this stuff to explain to me how counties and cities in Virginia work, because even figuring out what Arlington is isn't anywhere near as straightforward as I was hoping. I kind of just use whatever outline Google Maps gives me when I click on the word Arlington, and you can see it's served by multiple metro lines. I always like to see what cities do around metro stations, and the Rosslyn Station area actually has just about as recognizable a downtown fabric as exists anywhere in the DC area. Number 9 is Santa Monica, California, which does not have quite the recognizable clusters of density around its rail stations that Arlington does, but it's a work in progress. It's a city that is very walkable and bikeable, with tons of amenities. You know, I considered having criteria for affordability and, racial and socioeconomic diversity, but it felt like the video was gonna get a bit unfocused if I went that way. Let me know if you want to see a different critique of Suburbs, because it was definitely on my mind as I researched and analyzed all of this. Number 8 is Brookline, Massachusetts. You know, as I'm going through this, I'm kind of wondering, do a lot of you live in suburbs, and do you agree with the way I'm looking at this? Anyway, the parts of Brookline where people actually live in large numbers are covered pretty well by the C and D lines on the T. Really good density along the C line in particular, and a really good bike network in what's, let's be honest, a part of Brookline that, if it was any other metro area in the US, would be part of the core city. Super interesting. Bostonians, enlighten me down in the comments. Number 7 is Berkeley, California. Great downtown, very good walk and bike score ratings, and the BART red and orange lines travel below grade right through the center of the city. Super expensive place to live, as I talked about last week. The density around the downtown station is fine, but the other stations? Let's take a quick look. Ashby to the south, a bunch of surface parking and single-family housing. North Berkeley Station, it's like a transit citadel plopped down in the middle of a super block of surface parking, and then surrounded by million-dollar homes. What's great is this whole station area basically looks exactly the same as when it originally went into service in 1973. You know what though? That's just solid historical preservation. Bay Area, just always nailing it. Number 6 is Evanston, Illinois. Generally, better density around its stations than what we saw in Berkeley, particularly at Davis. Very good walk score rating and excellent for bikes. You actually see a bit of a theme with some of the entries on this list. If you watched my video on small cities with high transit ridership, they basically all had one thing in common: big universities. Well, now you see what happens when you have a big university in a suburb and you also have great transit connections into the core city. You're gonna have a lot of transportation options. Quick time out to acknowledge a couple places that aren't gonna show up on this list just because I don't have the data. I wanted to look at Mexican suburbs, but when you search them on walkscore.com, you get an unsupported country warning. But I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the urbanism of Guadalajara's suburbs, because they're pretty cool and the aerial imagery is decent. To the west, you get Zapopan, which is served by Line 3 on the rail system. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but you do get interesting modern stuff, like the Puerto de Hierro area. Then on the east side, you get Tlaquepaque, served by Line 1 and Line 3. It's funny, if you search Tlaquepaque on WalkScore, it gives you 100, and I don't know if I'm even gonna argue with that. Amazing variety of urban contexts all over the Guadalajara metro area, and just doing these screen captures is giving me a major travel itch. Mexico, I shall return. You also get the unsupported country warning for Puerto Rico, which seems a little wrong. I'm not sure what country WalkScore thinks this is. Probably wouldn't have made the top 10 anyway, but there are some cool spots in Bayamon and Guaynabo, which are both served by San Juan's Tren Urbano. Okay, let's get back to it. Number 5 is Somerville, Massachusetts, which has areas that are served by the Red Line and the D branch on the Green Line. Again, this is a very recognizably urban suburb, not only in its architecture and its density and the way it's laid out, but in the fact that the east end of the city practically touches downtown Boston. The whole greater Boston area is just organized in a very different way from our other cities. If you watched my live stream a couple weeks back, it was surprising, to me at least, that Boston was not one of the top 20 cities where my viewership originates from. I mean, I have Australian cities that are higher, but I think it's really just an artifact of how little of the metropolitan area's center is actually occupied by the city of Boston proper. Number 4 is New Westminster, British Columbia. It's a relatively close-in suburb, and it definitely has its own downtown and its own identity distinct from Vancouver. Good walk score rating, okay bike score rating, but it's really all about SkyTrain, and New Westminster is really well served by the Expo line. Just to be clear, the Greater Vancouver area has a population of around 2.6 million. That's about the same as US cities like Charlotte, Orlando, and San Antonio, cities where rail transit is extremely modest to non-existent. Well, the Expo line is an automated, fully grade separated metro that runs every 2 to 5 minutes on its trunk line. And New Westminster is the only Vancouver suburb that makes the cut here. But I'd just point out that those are crazy good headways, and the SkyTrain hits several other suburbs that don't have amazing density on average, but they have it where it counts, right around the stations. Can we just transplant some of these station areas to the East Bay or, like, I don't know, anywhere in California? Number 3 is Jersey City. Definitely has its own identity, separate from New York and Newark. Lots of density downtown, along the waterfront, well served by the PATH train. I didn't give credit for bus service or regional rail for that matter, even though I made a whole video about how well served the New Jersey suburbs are by the exclusive bus lane through the Lincoln Tunnel and the Port Authority bus terminal. I can imagine a different set of criteria that would have just turned this into a list of New Jersey suburbs, honestly, but who wants to see that? Okay, brief timeout before honorable mentions and the final 2. Drop a like on the video and subscribe if you're a lover of American suburbs, and frankly, who isn't? Social media links, always down in the description. Patreon is out there if you're interested in supporting, and I do have a new patron-only video going up this week. Sub count check. The channel now has enough subscribers to fill Ohio Stadium in Columbus. I do like Columbus, and this is a good urban university campus. I am filming this on the morning of Saturday the 3rd, and it looks like the Buckeyes are going to slide into the playoff. Nice job, Pac-12. Honorable mention, suburbs that were just too small to make the list, but that I think are interesting. Culver City, which I talked about in another video. Decatur, Georgia, about as good as it gets for a suburb in the American South. And I do have a soft spot for Clayton, Missouri. Well served by the metro, and it just has a very legit downtown. I don't really have dishonorable mentions. Toronto and Philly are kind of notable by their absence on this list, but my thought is the core cities themselves are just so good that why would you want to live in the suburbs in the first place? I guess you could make that argument for just about any city, but the top 2 suburbs on this list are crazy good in my opinion. And number 2 is Cambridge, Massachusetts. Similar to the other greater Boston entries on this list, it's extremely close into downtown. I mentioned universities being a theme. Yeah, I think that applies here. Red Line running all the way through the heart of the city with dense, active nodes around every station. Very hard to find a surface parking lot anywhere here. Certainly not surrounding T stations like some kind of moat. Maybe Greater Boston area planning staff should go on a junket to the Bay Area to find out how transit station land use planning is supposed to be done. Lots of Kermit all over the place. Cambridge does have the highest bike score rating on this whole list. And number one, you probably should have seen coming like a mile away. It's Hoboken, New Jersey. And I don't even think this is particularly close. These are the city limits of Hoboken, and 60,000 people live here. It's the densest city I looked at by far, and not unrelated, I would think, had the highest walk score rating out of everything I looked at, 97. Great service on the PATH train to Midtown or Lower Manhattan, or to Jersey City or Newark for that matter. Honestly, Hoboken has more of the density and livability that you'd associate with New York City than, well, most of New York City does. So, New Jersey wins. Okay, it was hard to do a full inventory and analysis here, and I think I caught everything, but let me know if you know of a good urbanist suburb that you think should have been on the list. Thanks for joining today, and thanks to the patrons, as usual. Keep the topic suggestions coming. I promise I archive all of them and then just wait for inspiration to strike. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.